Hey everybody, and welcome. No, I'm just kidding. Welcome to Chapter 17. We are in this particular class on our second to last chapter, and this chapter deals with the object data source control. Now, up until this point, you've been using the SQL data source control, and so kind of looking through the objectives, the first thing is we need to understand. Really, if I was going to renumber these, I would say this number 2. What are the main benefits of using the object data source? And in my answer to that question of what are the main benefits of using this control, I would answer, well, one of the main benefits is that you have a 3-layer architecture using an object data source control. So you really need to understand a 3-layer application and how they work so that you could then understand one of the benefits of the object data source. Now, what you're going to find out in this chapter is that the labs that we're going to do are functionally no different than some of the labs we've already done. But the structure of the application will be different. And so from a functional standpoint, these applications can grow, they can be scaled to large enterprise level applications. Whereas everything up until this point has not been a 3-tier application, they have actually been a 2-tiered application. And so we'll get into that a little bit more, but realizing that one of the main reasons of doing this extra coding, because we're going to be writing a lot more code in this chapter than we've written up until this point. And the benefit of that is 3 layers, 3 tiers. Okay. Part of the coding that we're going to be doing are these 3 classes right here. We're going to get real familiar with SQL connection, SQL command, and SQL data reader. There's also a programming feature. Maybe you've taken a C# or a Java class where you've studied reflection. And so we're going to look at reflection and see how is it used in this chapter. We will use business objects. Now, I really think this is interesting because this ties everything together. Everything you've done up until this point, you've written HTML, you've written CSS, your business objects, that's going to be what you did in Java or what you did in C#, where you created a student class, a student.java, right? That's your business object. So we're going to create a business object that will be used by our application. So I think that's really, and then the last piece of that is the database, right? We're going to interact with the database. So this application that we build, in my opinion, is really neat for you guys to see because this ties it all together. Everything from your HTML to the database to the C# and to the Java. You know, and I C# and Java I just use interchangeably, right? And then we're going to talk about, well, now that we have this new technique, this new control, object data source, it actually, you're going to find out it's a lot more code, and paging and sorting aren't as easy as just checking a couple boxes anymore. Okay. So moving on to this slide, and there is a little bit of theory before we jump into the hands-on here. An object data source allows for a 3-tier or 3-layer architecture. And what that means is different responsibilities can be put on different servers. Okay? Up until this point, there's really been 2 roles. Okay? Role number 1 being the web server. Role number 2 being the database server. So that's a 2-layer architecture. Okay? Well, now there's a 3rd role, and that 3rd role is the application server. Okay? So I want you to think of the 3 layers as in the presentation layer, that's your web server. That's going to host the website files, the ASPX, the images, okay, including the code behind for the ASPX. The middle layer then becomes your application server. The application server holds your business classes. This is your Java or your C# class files. And then you've got the same database layer. So what's the benefit of having 3 layers over 2? Well, you divide out the roles across more servers. Okay, so if you just have a 2-layer architecture, you've got a web server and a database server. Or even worse than that, if it's all on one server. I want you to imagine the web server, the application server, and the database server. Right now, like it's like your laptop. Your laptop is acting as 3 different jobs. Okay? Well, that's fine when it's one person using the website, or maybe 10 people using the website. But what happens when 1,000 or 100,000 people go to use your website? That one poor computer, that one poor server has a lot of responsibility then at that point. Okay, so now you can see the benefit of having multiple layers. You have the presentation layer for your website files or your ASPX files. The middle layer is a different server that hosts your application, your C# or your Java. Okay, and then the database layer holds the database, the MDF, as you will in Microsoft world, right? So you divide out the roles, you divide out the responsibilities, then each server can function more efficiently, as opposed to having a bunch of jobs all on one server. So to clarify that a little bit more, because I just got asked a question, this is not a requirement, okay? These 3 different jobs, if you will, they don't have to be on different servers, right? But they have the ability to be on different servers, right? And when you divide out the responsibilities, one server doesn't get become a bottleneck. Okay, it doesn't become a bottleneck because it's doing so many different jobs. You separate out the jobs, then each server has one job. Okay, now even further than that, sometimes they call this the letter N, tier architecture. Well, N tier, well, that really says, okay, does the database really have to be on one server? Or could you take that role and spread it off across 50 servers, right? That one database, all the data, the tier is still the database tier, but you might have 50 database servers handling those jobs. Okay, I mean, you think about like a Facebook, they don't have one computer that acts as the database server for Facebook. So it's not just like 3 servers even, but it is separation of roles. Okay, that's why they say N tier, because 3, I think in some people's minds, I think 3 just means they just think, well, 3 servers. No, you know, you could have at any one of these layers, you could have multiple servers. Okay, and this is just the text definition of what I kind of just described. Again, look in here, the presentation can have your controls on it in your ObjectDataSource Control. Again, this is your ASPX. The middle layer has your data access. So we're going to write some C# today that accesses data from a database. It is also going to have your business objects like your customers or products or employees. And it has business rules like saying a customer can't have a balance less than 0. Well, that's implemented just like you guys did in Java to say, okay, the balance can't be less than 0. You know, that's a business rule that's set by the business. And then, of course, the database has the data. Has your it's your .mdf. It's where the data exists inside the tables, and you get all the normalized tables, etc. Now, I'm not going to focus too much on these slides, but these are the classes that we're going to work with. Okay, if you notice the SQL connection class, it's responsible for making a connection to a SQL server. Makes sense? The SQL command class, it's responsible for executing your commands and storing your commands if you decide to write your own SQL commands in C#. Okay, or if you're calling a stored procedure from the database, it's up to the SQL command class to do that. Okay, so SQL command and SQL data reader. Once you've executed a command, like let's say you execute a select, well then you put the results of that select statement in a data reader. Okay, and the data reader's job is to read that data and what will it do? It'll read the data and it will return that data to a data bound control. Okay, so that the control can then display it. Okay, and again, I didn't really hit too much on these methods and of these parameters because we're going to use them, so you're going to see this in action. Okay, so that's data reader, and I thought to kind of hello world this, right? This is the most basic drop-down list with an object data source, and I thought it makes sense to just start with the most simple example that I could, just so you could see. Now, you will realize, I mean, this is a lot more C# code that we've written before. Particularly, again, we're working with these classes, okay? So, anytime you write C# code, you want to add a .NET folder called app code, app_code. Now, typically, app data, that's where a database would be, but app code, that's where your C# code is going to be. So this folder has a specific meaning in the .NET world. This is where you put your middle layer, the code for the middle layer. Okay, so that's why we want to use this specific folder, and you know, you'll kind of see how this works here in a little bit. Once I have an app code, I'll go ahead and add a class. So this is creating a C# class. Now, going from our example, if I look at the end product, there's not a screenshot of it, but basically this drop-down list, we're just going to create a drop-down list with categories. So I believe this was the categories drop-down list. So let me pull this back up and let's see. The name of this class, yeah, it is from the categories table. When I'm kind of taking a look at something real quick, this is why there's a pause here. When you see this DB on a class, that means that this is a data access class, that we are going to write data access code. So we're going to tie in a database here. So that's what the DB represents here. I'm following an example here, so that's why I'm going to keep it product DB, even though we are working with the categories table. I'm not sure why the name in this example is product DB, but you could very well name this category, but I'm not going to. We're just going to keep it the same. Now, because you've all taken at least one programming class before, you know, you got the keyword public class and then the name of our class. And what is this? Right here, it says it in the comments. That's your. It's a method, and this particular method has the same name as the class, aka a constructor. So I'm going to collapse that and write our own method here, right? So you'll notice our method is public, static, okay, and I'm not going to explain every bit along the way. I mean, obviously these keywords have meaning, right? The public keyword means something. Static means something. That's our return data type,
Static
right?
is
That's an
static.
interface.
Static is also like one copy of. Like that's what Mr. Lutz kind of told us.
And our method name is get all categories. Okay. Now inside of here, again, we're working with these new classes, right? The first class that we're going to work with, you'll notice SQL connection. Now here, and I'll just kind of type this, con. You'll notice it says, hey, I don't recognize that type. So we're creating a variable here called con, but it's saying I don't recognize that type. Well, there are some using statements up at the top. Think of in Java, that's an import statement. Okay, same way in C#. Okay, and what makes it really nice is they even, if you hit Alt-Enter, they even tell you which using statement to bring into the mix. I'll kind of zoom in here.
You hit Alt-Enter there?
I hit Alt-Enter. I'll do that a few more times. Okay, now let me finish this line of code. New SQL connection, and what we have here is another method call. Okay, this SQL connection says call this method called getConnectionString. So I'm going to write another method, and when I do that, this red squiggly line will go away. Okay, but for now that squiggly line is going to be there because I don't have that method created yet. Okay, now because I don't have a stored procedure, or I don't have a SQL data source where my select statement is stored, I'm just going to hand code this. Now there's a lot of danger here, okay, because it's very easy to have a typo when you're handwriting SQL statements, okay? So I'll make a few, I'll point out a few things here. Select the category ID and the long name. Now it's not case sensitive. Now when I do a line break, right, we're doing string concatenation here. I mean, imagine it's all on one line. You need this space here because if you don't put the space and you're imagining this is all on one line, well, long name is going to butt up right against the word from. You need a space in between there, right? So if you do this concatenation thing, make sure you got the appropriate spacing in your query. Okay, so we're selecting these two columns from this table, and we're going to order by. Okay, put your semicolon. Okay, so here we got our connection object. We've got our SQL query stored in a string. Now we're going to open up a command. Because we already have this using statement from before, it recognizes our command. And in the constructor of our command, we pass it the connection object and our query. So it says, hey, this command uses our connection con and the string str. Do I have this backwards? Yes. Wait, do I? SQL. I do have it backwards. I'm going to change this from str. This should be SQL. So the first argument is SQL, then con. I just have it backwards. Okay, so now we have now used the connection object. We've used the command object. We've passed a couple of different things in their constructors. And very similar to when you did flat files. When you worked with flat files, you had to open a connection to the flat file. So con.open opens your connection. Now, here comes the data reader class. And in the data reader, we're going to store the results of our query. So what we do is we do cmd, which is our command, execute reader, because it's just a reading command. We can execute reader. And then what we do is we close our connection. Now you'll see it automatically inserted a system data for me. I don't want that. Instead, I'll put in another using statement. I'm going to do this again. So you put the cursor over here, and you notice it says show potential fixes, Alt-Enter or Control dot. I'll do another Alt-Enter. Alt-Enter using system.data. So now it puts system.data up in our using statement. Okay, don't forget your semicolon. Okay, and then what we do is we return our data reader. Okay, now you'll notice our return data type is IEnumerable. Well, lucky for us, SQL data reader implements the IEnumerable interface. Therefore, it makes this a valid return type. Now this is still barking at us. I'm going to do control dot this time. And we'll add in this using statement. So that fixes that problem. Okay. So our method is all pretty well finished. The only thing we have left is this get connection string, which I'll go ahead and code that up. And right now we're only using this method one time, but later on our applications will be a little bit more complex. And so we'll use this method multiple times. So that's why we write out this get connection string method. Okay, and this is a private method. No other classes use it. Static returns a string. We're calling it get connection string. Okay, return configuration manager dot, and of course we need a lot of usings. Okay, alt enter or control dot. We'll do control dot using system configuration. Okay, so that's nice.
So it's control period.
Yes, control period. Yep. Connection strings. Sub, this is the name of our connection string in the web config. You might be saying, Mr. G, do we have a connection string in the web config? Okay. So essentially, this method gets the connection string out of the web config, named Halloween connection. But if you open up the web config, there is no connection string named Halloween connection. So is there an easy way that you guys know to do that?
You just drag and drop it and find what it looks like.
Yeah, so there is. And I haven't created my ASPX page yet, but let's go ahead and do that. So I'll add a web form. And so this is the easy way to do that task. Okay. The easy way to do that task is temporarily add a SQL data source, point it to the Halloween database, name it, whoop. We wanted to name it something very specific, right? So we have to use that name, Halloween connection. So let's go here, here, Halloween connection, Control A to highlight, Control V to paste, Halloween connection. Next, it doesn't even matter because we're not using this. But part of that wizard generated a connection string called Halloween connection. Okay? But now that we're done with this, we're not using SQL data sources anymore. So that goes away. Okay? So there we go. There we go. What we are using though, and let's add an object data source. Okay, let's configure the data source. I skipped a step. Here's one very important step. After you have finished working on this class file, and this is called the data access class. Okay, once you're done with this, make sure to do a build. This compiles your C# class.
The one you just made.
The one that you just made. Now, if you don't do a build or you don't compile one and the same thing, what's going to happen is you're going to go to this configure data source, and it's not going to show up right here in your dropdown. This is our class that we just created, okay? And it shows up because we did a build. If I didn't do a build, that might not show up there. Okay, so that's an important step. And here's our CRUD operations. In this case, we're just doing a select, which is nice. Okay, now let's add in our drop-down list, and you're going to see this doesn't work as nicely out of the box. This is worth remembering. I am going to enable auto postback. Let's choose our data source 1. Look at this, no options in our drop-down list. Okay, thing is, just works differently. Depending on the method that you write, the method that we wrote was not returning a strongly typed collection, okay? We will do that, okay? So coming up in this video, we'll do that. But luckily, we can still type. So what is the name of the data field to display?
Categories ID.
Well, we don't want to display the ID.
Yeah, category.
That was the long name.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the long name. And then the value would be category ID. This is nothing too complex. I mean, if you look at the source code for this, these are just properties, right? The text field is long name, and the value field is category ID. You could set that about 10 different ways, because in here, you could hand code it if you want to. Data text field, data value field. Okay? It's just a little less fortunate that if you don't use what's called a strongly typed collection from your method and you don't return a strongly typed collection, you don't get as many features, I guess. Okay, and there we go. A lot more work. I think we'd all agree. A lot more work to get a simple drop-down list. However, realize the benefit of this is that this code is more maintainable. Okay, it's scalable, meaning your application can grow and scale to a lot more users because of this different type of architecture. What would happen would be you could take this app code folder and put it on the middle tier. You could put it on a different server so that server's job can be, to process that C# file. Okay, your ASPX could be on an app, a web server, and your database could be on a database server. Okay, now if I wanted to finish this, right? So we already have the category. Here's a grid view. ID, product, unit price, and on hand. I'm going to write another select statement. And this other select statement will be used in this control. Now, because the object data source only supports, if I look at this object data source, okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm going to add in a second object data source. And again, the main reason, I can only configure one select statement per object data source. I need a different select statement here. So I need a different object data source. Okay, but let's go ahead and write the method first. Again, our method's inside of our app code.
Can you scroll over to the right?
Yes, I can scroll over. Yep. Okay, so let's whip together this one, and you're going to see a lot of the same classes. This one's different though because this one has a parameter that is accepted into this method. Well, if you think about this, your drop-down list has to pass a category ID for your grid view to use. That's why this method accepts a parameter. Okay? When you have a parameter, there's a little bit of a process that you have to follow. So it's a little bit different. So that's going to be the main difference between this method and this method is there's going to be a parameter. Okay? However, this first line is just the same, so I can copy this and paste it with a SQL connection. Our string, I'll zoom back in here so you guys can see a little bit better. Okay, so our select statement is going to be a little bit different. Again, this is kind of your warning area. It's very easy to make a typo and crash things here. So I'm going to select the product ID, name, unit price, on hand, from the products table, where the category equals a parameter called category ID. Okay, so we're going to have to create this parameter because this does not equal this. Okay, we have to match these two together. Okay, which we will do.
I don't think you're supposed to have a comma after.
Oh, good eye, good eye. No, no comma there. Okay, we're category equals category ID, and I think they have an order by. Yes, they do. So we'll add an order by, and they order by the product ID. Okay. Now again, I think it's really important to point out that there are spaces in between my line breaks. Therefore, the query doesn't run together and cause an error. Okay, so it's concatenating properly.
When you do like that, Mr. G, when you're concatenating like that, just putting one on your line. Isn't that like when you look at it in the browser, doesn't that just put that all in one line?
It does, yeah. So now we open up our command object, and if I type them in the right order this time, we put our query first, and then our connection second. Now this line, and I'll even put a comment, creates the parameter at category ID. Okay, so this is how we do that. We're going to say CMD. So our command object has a parameter, so we're going to add to the parameters collection cmd.parameters.add with value. So the name of our parameter is category ID. And the variable that has our value is this category ID right here. Okay, so this will create a parameter for this query to use, getting its data from category ID. This variable, this string variable, will be passed in from our drop-down list. Okay, we still have to configure our drop-down list to, we still have to configure our object data source, our new one, to accept that parameter. Okay. Yes.
So.
Okay, so that's our parameter. And now we do the same thing. We do con.open. We get a data reader, SQL data reader, dr equals execute reader, command behavior, close connection. And then I'm going to return the data reader, okay, which is, again, data readers implement IEnumerable, therefore valid return type. All right, so back on our ASPX page, let's go ahead and add another SQL data source. Configure the data source. Oh, geez, SQL, wrong. Object data source, wrong chapter. Object data source.
What's an entity object or entity data source?
So Clint said, hey, what's an entity data source? Next chapter.
Okay.
We will get into entity framework. Next chapter.
Cool.
Okay, business object is still one and the same. Our select now is the one with the parameter. Get products by category. When it has a parameter, notice we get an extra step in our wizard. It says, hey, where are you getting this category ID? Well, I'm getting it from a control, drop down list 1. Okay, and if I look at the source code for this, you'll actually see the select parameters come from a control, drop down list 1, selected value. Okay, going back to design, let's add in our data source, or excuse me, our grid view. This is coming from data source 2. Save it, view in browser. Make sure this is doing a post back, that's good. And you can see it's nice and easy to have a typo. Invalid column name category. So that comes in our SQL statement.
When you go to build it, you build solution or build?
Oh, really build it? Yeah, build solution up at the top. Yeah, very good. Oh yeah, you see that. Yeah, you did.
So this would I had before.
Where category ID, that's what it is. Category ID equal at category ID. So I'm glad I demonstrated how easy it is to make a mistake. There we go.
What was the mistake? You just missed
It was like the idea.
I didn't put the, it was where the category ID column, so I just said category instead of category ID.
So yeah, it's like extremely case sensitive. I see what you're saying.
Okay, so this is kind of your hello world because this is only doing a select. Okay, so this is more code than before, but it is also more basic, I would say, than doing all of the operations. Okay, the next example we're going to give does a few more things. Okay, and this is just a lot of the ASPX code. You notice they're using Bootstrap. They actually use a data list instead of a grid view, which is fine. You guys have been through a data list control, so you should understand how that works. They have select parameters just like I do. Notice the type name attribute of the object data source. Type name, that's the name of your data access class. So type name attribute, product DB, that's the name of our C# class that we created. Okay. Now I want to show you something. They have this little thing here that we haven't seen before on their public static class product DB. This is called an attribute. Okay. This is a class attribute. They also have method attributes above their methods. Okay. And these are tools that help us during design time. This isn't a runtime thing. Your application will run just the same, but let me show you how these little attributes work. Going back here, when I configure my data source, if I check show only data components, my class doesn't show up. Okay, if I uncheck it, it does. Okay, but imagine there's a lot of classes in your app code folder. Okay, you might only want data components to show up, so you don't have to choose from a large list. Okay, so that's where the class attributes come into play. Let me go ahead and add on my class. Let me add in this class attribute. Okay, and I'll do that by data object parens true. And again, we'll do our little control dot using system component model. Okay, so save it, build it, object data source, configure data source. Now it shows up.
So why did that
Only
attribute-
if it's checked. Now, if there were other classes that didn't have that attribute, they wouldn't show up right now.
I'm failing to understand how that attribute made it. Oh, because like it described as a data component, essentially.
So just
Okay. So those are the attributes. In this next example, I'm going to start over, okay? And I'm going to do all 4 CRUD operations. Okay, I'm going to do select, insert, update, and delete. Probably the most complex is the update, but I'm going to try and make it as simple as possible. Okay? Insert, delete, select, I will do them all. I'll tell you what, I'm going to send my class on a break here real quick, so I'm going to pause the recording. Coming back from break here, and We left off right here, basically saying, hey, we just did a couple of select statements, but we need to do the other operations as well. I did want to point out a few different things on this. Basically, you know, your object data source needs to point at the right methods to do the right operations. So there's properties for each one of the operations. The object data source, the control, will use what's called reflection. And this is this third bullet down here. And essentially what reflection is a way that you can get details. And in other words, what's the method name and what's its parameter list, to be able to tell what methods are available for use. And so in a condensed way to explain this, it's because of reflection that we can use the GUI on our object data source to determine what methods are available in our C# classes that we write. And so we've already used reflection in our last examples. And then most of these methods are going to require one parameter, or none, or two. So they're going to require 0, 1, or 2. We've already seen a none. We've already seen a one parameter. The update, though, the update method, the update function would require 2 if you use optimistic concurrency. Now, we were looking at our select method earlier. In both of our examples, we returned an IEnumerable. We had a data reader, which implements IEnumerable. We're going to do some more examples where we return objects themselves, and not just a business class, but we'll return a list of objects, so like an array, if you will, of objects. And so there are some different acceptable return types for your select methods. I'm going to kind of skip the code right now because we will write that. Again, this kind of talks about the parameters and how they work. So here's the insert or delete. The insert or delete is going to use one parameter. If you do not use optimistic concurrency, your update method will also use one parameter. If you do use optimistic concurrency, right here, you'll have 2 parameters, okay? And you'll see how that works because I will do that in my demonstration. There is a property called old values parameter format string. Okay, that's a long name there. That we're going to have to use that property to determine the original value of your data, right? Because if we're using optimistic concurrency, that matters. Okay, and so we will definitely use that property in our example. We're also going to generate another C# class. This is going to be our business class. This is going to be our student. This is going to be, our account or whatever our class is. And there are some rules for that business class. Really, they're pretty simple. It needs a parameterless constructor. Parameterless constructor, I can say that. It'll have public properties that match the names of the columns from your database. And they will have get and set accessors. And so this is these concepts, if you're in 3rd semester and you haven't taken a C# class, these are kind of newer concepts for you. These ideas behind public properties and get and set accessors, because you haven't seen them in Java.
Getters and setters?
Different than getters and setters. They do the same thing though. Okay, but they're just a little bit different. Okay, so I'll go ahead and create those. These are these properties that we were working with. We already did the object class attribute. Okay, this attribute, I think I said properties, but they are attributes. And then each method has a select method, insert, update, and delete. Okay, so you can mark your methods so that the GUI at design time can pick up on that. Okay, and I'm going to skip the code for now. Yeah, that's because I'm going to write that. Okay, and so this is going to be what we're creating, and this is going to take a little bit of time, so be patient. But we're creating a category maintenance with a grid view that can edit and delete, and a details view, it looks like, that can do an insert. So if I pull up the code, and I want to start from scratch. Tell you what, I'm going to leave the connection string in my web config. You already saw how to do that. But otherwise, I'm going to delete and start from an empty web form. And category maintenance heading. Okay, and here, let's go ahead and add a class.
So if you have like select, insert, update, delete, are those each in their own class?
Each in their own method.
And
One
each in their own
class,
for everything?
each has its own method. So again, this is called our data access class. Our data access class has the methods in it to do the CRUD operations. Okay. Let's go ahead and mark this attribute on here of a data object to true. Control dot using system component model. Good. Data object method. The method type is select. So it's going to be our first operation is select. So here goes our select method. And this time, we are going to return a list of categories. Okay. So this one, instead of IEnumerable, we're returning a list. Just think an array. A list is just a collection of something, which is what an array is. And in this case, it's a collection of categories. Well, category isn't showing up because we don't have our business object. Category is our business object. Okay, so I can create our business object pretty simply. Let's add another class called category, so this fixes this problem. Okay, so here's our class of category. And we need to follow a few basic rules. Again, these are our properties. So we're going to make a public string category ID get and set. So I'll explain this real quick. This is a property. This is a C# property. So if you've only taken Java at this point, you're not familiar with C# properties. But what a C# property does, this is extremely shorthand. Matter of fact, they have a name for it. This is called auto-implemented C# property. And what this does is it creates a instance field. So think of Java, think of your instance fields. And it creates a way to access that data and modify that data, all through one structure called a property. Okay, so it's actually super simple the way it works. Okay, as soon as I use it, I'm just creating it right now. As soon as I use it, I'll show you how. I'll point it out. Okay, but all this class is 3 properties. This is very, very shorthand. Matter of fact, this syntax hasn't been around but a few years. I mean, I want to say 5 years. Okay, very shorthand. Okay, so that's our category class, and you'll notice now our list of category is now recognized. Okay, because we now know what a category is. And the first thing I'll do go ahead and create a list of category. Okay, so one thing that you need to know about lists as compared to arrays, you know, arrays use subscripts and to assign data into them. Well, lists use methods. So matter of fact, I think in Java you had an array list class. And in that array list class, you used methods to add data to your array list. So a list is very similar to that. All right, and now let's go ahead. And this is similar to what we did before. We're going to write our SQL in a string. Category ID, short name, long name. I'm just going to continue on. From categories, order by long name. Yes.
Should there be a space between long and name?
No, there should not. Order by a long name. Good catch. Now, this is also a new structure called a using block. And the way a using block works is that you open up a resource, and as soon as the using block ends, you close the resource. So it's a very efficient way of using something for a short period of time and not wasting memory. Okay, so this is another way of using your SQL connection. And just like before, it doesn't recognize SQL connection, so let's go ahead and do that. SQL connection con equals new SQL connection. Call a get connection string method. Doesn't exist yet. Now here's our using block. Okay, so as long as we're inside of this using block, this connection is fine. As soon as we're done, it should be closed though. Okay, as soon as we're outside of this using block, that connection should close. In fact, the first thing we'll do is we'll open our connection, generate our SQL data reader, and to do that, we execute our command. Now, I jumped ahead because there's a nested using statement. We open up our connection. Here's another using statement. SQL command, CMD equals new SQL command using the SQL string and con connection. Now we do con.open. Now we open up a data reader and execute our reader. Okay, so the results of our SQL statement get stored in this DR object. So that's what happens on this line. Go ahead and create a variable. Its data type is category, and we're going to use it here in a second. We say while the data reader has data, while we can continue to read from our data reader, so we got a nice little loop going on here. Go ahead and instantiate our object with no data in it. And now we get to use those properties that we created before. So we say category.category ID. So this is actually assigning, just like your mutator would put data into a variable. That's what we're doing here. This property category ID, we're assigning a value of it to be out of the data reader, the category ID to string. And you do that for each of its fields. Category dot short name equals data reader short name to string. And then what we do is once we have one category object, we add it to our list. Category list dot add our object of category. And so you can see while the data reader has more data, it creates a new category, populates it with data, and adds it to our list. Does the data reader have more data? Then go ahead and do it again. If it has more data, do it again. As soon as there's nothing to read, you break out of the loop. In which case, once the loop is broken out of, we close our data reader. And then that closes our command. This block closes our connection. Let's see, I gotta line this up. Now we're still inside of our list, or it's still inside of our method, and this is where we return our list. So we say return category lists. So we return our list here. So that makes our method happy because we have a return object. We've returned a list, I should say. Now, it still doesn't like this get connection string because we haven't created our connection string. Let me collapse that. Okay, let's go ahead and create our connection string, and that's just the same way it was before. Private static string get connection string. Okay, doesn't know what that is. Control dot return configuration manager connection strings. The name of our connection string was Halloween connection. Copy that, paste it. Connection string. Okay, so now we're doing good here. Let's go ahead and do a build. Build succeeded, so it compiles fine. Let's go into our toolbox. Object data source. There's our get categories now. That's fine. Again, reflection is used here to be able to find what methods exist inside of that class. Okay, if I go into my toolbox, grid view, okay. Except for my select statement's pulling from the wrong table. Let me fix that real quick. This was the last example, not this one. All I have to do is fix my select. So let me go back into here. Wait a minute, this is right. I just don't have the headers. ID, short name, long name. Thought I made a mistake. ID, short name, long name. ID, short name, long name. It's fine. I don't know why I thought I was doing the wrong thing. My mistake. Okay. Arguably, the more difficult operation after this would be update. Okay, because update, the method takes more parameters. Right now we don't have any parameters. We just demonstrated, while I pause that there, we could still edit the columns and change, for example, short name to be short name. And that's really the benefit. That's really the benefit of a strongly typed collection. In our last example, and you might not realize it now, these column headings weren't there. And so when we were just returning IEnumerable, we didn't have the ability to do this when we were just doing IEnumerable. And you can, I'll put this on YouTube, you can go back and see that these column headings were not there. So that's really the benefit of a strongly typed collection and why we're doing it this way instead. Okay, so let's do edit next. And we will use optimistic concurrency. So we'll, right here after our select, we'll make another data object method type dot update. Okay, public static. This is going to return an int, and basically the int's going to say how many rows were updated, 0 or 1, right? 0 if it doesn't work, 1 if it does work. And we're going to update our category here. And again, this is going to take 2 parameters: the original category and the new category, simply called category. Okay. Make sure I don't have any typos here. So 2 parameters. We are using optimistic concurrency. I'll have to show you a few steps along the way so we don't forget anything. The variable that we return one way or another is update count. We set it equal to 0 because no rows have been updated yet. So we will, at the end of this, return that variable. And here goes our update statement. Not STL, SQL. And I'm gonna sway off of the book's code a little bit. I can simplify it just a little bit. So you're gonna notice, if you are following along, that this is a little bit shorter. I'm going to update the categories. Put this in quotes. Update the categories table. Set the short name column equal to the short name parameter. Keep in mind, anytime we have one of these parameters, we need to run a add parameters with value method, just like we did before. So that's one. We're gonna do this a few times. Set short name to the short name, comma, long name equal to at long name, where, well, make sure we got our space there, where category ID equals the original ID. And that is slightly simplified in the sense that we only have 3 parameters in this query. So update the categories table, set the short name and the long name, where the primary key equals the original category ID. Now I'm going to have a couple using statements, but these are just the same as before. So I'm going to copy this from the select and put it into our update. And it's erroring out because I'm missing a curly brace. And now it's erroring out because my curly braces are off. I'm going to pause the video and get my curly braces straight.
Sure.
Probably didn't need to pause the video, but I did there. It's just missing one extra one. So, okay, so now my methods aren't some sort of oddly nested. They're all independent. Okay, so we got our connection, we got our command. Let's go ahead and add our parameters. So inside of our command, our parameters add with value. So the first one that we name is this, we need this at short name. And so the short name comes from, now up here, we've got the original category and the new category. So the short name comes from category dot short name. If we do this again, parameters add with value, long name, and again, this comes from this parameter category dot long name, and parameters add with value. So our third one is called original category ID, and that one comes from original underscore category dot category ID. Now these again are using the property. So think of this as a read. This is like get long name, get short name, get category ID. So that's your accessor in Java, right? Whereas in the other method we were mutating it. We were calling the set block. Okay? So don't forget your semicolon. Now I'll go ahead and do a connection.open. And we're going to set our update count variable equal to cmd execute non-query. Now before we just said execute query. Execute query is a read. It's a select statement. So execute non-query is going to be like an update or a delete or an insert. Okay? So if this works, the update count will modify the row and this will return a value of 1. So let's go outside of our using, outside of that using, still inside the method, and let's return our int, which is update count. So this is a little bit simplified from what the book has. I didn't practice this for a while. I actually did this shorter version maybe a year ago was the last time I tried this. I remember it working, but again, this is a little bit on the fly here, so it might break. But we can now configure our data source, and on update, we can choose our update category. Notice it takes 2 parameters. Okay. Now there's a few more properties we need to set for this to work. It will not work if you don't set these properties. Okay. Because we are using optimistic concurrency, our conflict detection needs to compare all values. Our data object type name. This is the name of our business class. So our business class is called category, so you have to set that to be the category class that matches this. Oh, now that I'm clicked off of it, let's go back, click the properties, okay. And Notice the old values parameter format string. Notice how it's original underscore? Well, that's the name of our parameter. And so I wanted to double check that. Now, see, here's original underscore category. So the name of this parameter matters because it's set in the properties right here. So again, I'm going to look one more time, compare all values is correct. Our original parameter format string is right here, that's good. The type name, that's the name of our data access class, that's good. And our data object type name is category, that's our business object, that is correct. Now all we have to do is on our grid view, let's edit the columns. Let's go into a command field, add the edit, okay. A word to the wise, never expect it to work the first time. Okay, odds are I made a mistake somewhere.
Or not.
Or not. Be happy. Be happy if it works the first time. Don't expect it to.
That's what one of the developers test out.
Okay, so very happy about that it works the first time. We now have 2 of the operations working. Let's go ahead and do the insert. So insert should be easier because there's only 1 parameter on the method. So let's go back into our class here. Again, looking at this, we've got our constructor, we've got our select, our update, our get connection string. So let's go ahead and do an insert right here. Data object method, method type, dot insert. Again, it's because of these attributes that the GUI knows what methods work where. Okay, public static void insert category. This only has 1. Okay, and we have an insert into categories. And we can go ahead and specify the columns, the ID, the name, long name, the values, and these are our parameters at category ID, and I'm going to keep it caps there, at short name, at long name, and semicolon. Let's go ahead and include our using blocks. These are simple enough to copy and paste. I know what I did last time now. I copied the top. I didn't put in the 2 closing. Yeah, that's what I didn't do. I just copied part of it. Let's go into an insert, paste it. Interestingly enough, it closes, actually just moves it. That's what it does. So let's go ahead and put in those, save it, and line it back up. It's trying to be helpful, but it messed with me. All right, let's go ahead and add our parameters now. cmd.add parameters .add with value. Our first parameter is category ID, and it comes from category ID. Add with value. Our next parameter is short name. comes from category short name. Okay, so now we have our parameters defined, which is good. Let's go ahead and open the connection and execute non-query. And since our return type is void, we're just trying to insert. And so that should be all that we need. A lot easier, huh? Just insert, a lot quicker.
Don't you enable insert on the grid view?
So what I'm going to do is well, grid view doesn't have an insert feature, so what I'll do is I'll add another control from the toolbox. I will add a details view, and let's configure the insert method here, insert category. I'm going to put this mode of the details view to automatically be on insert. So let's find the mode of our details view. Default mode is insert. And there's no button to click to insert. So I have to enable inserting. So let's click on this right here.
Yeah, you clicked on it. Then
There
I
we
clicked,
go.
I was like, what?
Let's try this again. So the category ID will be music, short name musical. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what it says, just trying it out here. And now we see that the insert did in fact work.
So with the
Okay, and the fourth operation is delete. And so we can figure that out. Going back in our data access class. So there's our select, there's our insert, there's our update. And let's put in delete right here. And for our delete, it is going to return an int. With one parameter. Start off our count at 0. Delete from categories. And again, I can shorten this up where category ID equals at category ID, assuming that that's a unique key. You could have ands. You could say and the long name is the long name and the short name is the short name, and then you have to have 3 parameters, add with values. Keep it short and simple. Let's go ahead and get our using statements out of here. And close and close. Add our 1 parameters. Our parameter is called category ID. It comes from category ID. Open the connection. Semicolon. Set our delete count equal to our execute non-query because it's a delete statement. Basically, the only one that's execute query is select. The other three operations, you're always executing non-query, putting it in an integer, returning that integer. Give it a good build. Good. Object data source. Configure the data source. Here's our delete category. Enable deleting. Let's take a look. Again, never expect it to work the first time. Let's go ahead and update it. We already knew the update worked. Let's click delete. Again, never expect it to work the first time, but sometimes you get lucky and it does. Okay, so that's the 4 CRUD operations using a object data source, a couple different controls. Let's kind of go back into the PowerPoint here. That's a demonstration of slide 31. They really give you a lengthy explanation of all the code. The one thing I didn't do here is check for data validation using these methods on deleted, on updated. You know, I didn't generate any methods from our details view or our grid view. But you've done this in other labs. So that's not really the focus here. That's our category class. We did that. Here's our DB file. Wrote a lot of this code. You notice, for example, my delete, right? So we just did delete recently. Notice how their parameters, they wanted to make sure you're only deleting the category ID where the category ID matches, the short name matches, and the long name matches. They're just very thorough so you don't accidentally delete data, which is really important. But to keep it short and simple, I shortened it up for you. I think the same thing with the update. On my where clause, I said set the short name and the long name where the category ID matches. I didn't have it match these other fields as well, just to keep it short.